Guys, I'm really happy to welcome back to the podcast our friend Rebekah Koffler. She's a Russian-born former Defense Intelligence Agency officer, expert on Russian affairs. Her work has been featured all over the place: The Hill, The Washington Times, Daily Caller, Fox News. She's also the author of Putin's Playbook, and her website, Rebekah, RebekahKoffler.com. Rebekah, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. This war in the Ukraine is dragging on. It seems that the momentum appears to move one way and then move the other. Let me start with actually a kind of a simple question, which is, I would have thought before all this started that a war between Russia and Ukraine is like a war between Germany and Luxembourg. You got a big, powerful country, a one-time superpower. You've got a small little twerpy Ukraine. I would have thought that Russia would be able to crush Ukraine in 3 weeks. How is it that this war has dragged on? Is it that Western support has been critical? Talk a little bit about just the simple anomaly that Ukraine has been able to hang in there for so long, and apparently with some effectiveness.
Hi, Dinesh, and thank you for having me again. This is a really funny analogy that you've come up with. Very accurate, by the way. Yes, Putin and the entire U.S. security apparatus originally underestimated Ukraine, Zelensky, their will to fight, and we all thought that the blitzkrieg that Putin was promising to us was going to translate into reality. None of it happened, and the real reason is this. First is that the Russian military conventionally has always been inferior to U.S. military and NATO militaries. Okay, why is this important? It's important because this is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a proxy war between Russia and NATO. The difference is that we're using Ukrainians to fight this war. We're providing superior weaponry, very, very sophisticated military hardware, right? And this is why the Russians conventionally, and that's very important, are losing tactically. But at the strategic level, the Russians are really doing what they've always done. They're focusing on the big picture. They're destroying Ukraine right now. They are wiping it off the map, degrading infrastructure, and making sure that Ukraine does not provide any value to NATO. And this is how Putin fights this war. This is their modus operandi. It's no different than what Russia fought, for centuries. This is how they fight wars.
I mean, in some ways, this almost seems reminiscent of when the Nazis invaded Russia. The Russians were like, hey, listen, if you're going to take territory, we're going to blow everything up. So you're not going to get anything in this territory. And we pull further into Russia. So you're saying that Putin's strategy is that, in a sense, he could lose the war, but still achieve his objective, which is to take Ukraine out of play as a Western ally. Now, there are people in America, and I think this reflects my thinking as well, where we think, obviously, morally, strategically, we're on the side of Ukraine. Putin is clearly the bad guy here. And yet, sort of a blank check to Zelensky or to the Ukraine is something that we need to think about. And there are a lot of Americans who think, what about our domestic problems? How should we reconcile the domestic needs and at the same time a war that seems far away and yet obviously also in the U.S. interest?
That's a very, very tough question, Dinesh, and Americans are divided on this question. Half of the country believes that it's very important to help Ukraine win the war and to do everything possible. We have already provided half of Ukraine's GDP in terms of military hardware and in terms of financial assistance. Okay. In 2021, this was $100 billion. And so Joe Biden requests that we continue to provide this assistance indefinitely. And again, the elites believe that this is a viable option to continue pumping that money, to continue having this spigot open, and that could turn and is already turning into Afghanistan 2.0, right? So they're willing for 20 years to do that. There's the other half, and indeed 47% of Americans already recognize that mathematically it's just prohibitive for our country to sustain this type of endless foreign war. And so what is the right thing? No one knows what the right thing to do is. As a former Defense Intelligence Agency officer who focused on Russian doctrine and strategy, I can tell you this war is unwinnable in terms of, kicking out Russians out of Ukraine, which they already are occupying 20% of, is unrealistic. And General Milley himself, as I don't have much respect for General Milley, because he's the one who actually colluded behind former President Trump's back with the Chinese, promising them that he's going to warn them about a potential attack. But even he stated that there's no military path to victory. And so that is the conundrum. That is the checkmate that Putin has driven Washington into. Remember, the Russians have always known that the war between NATO and Russia is inevitable. They've done it through their military intelligence forecasting. And as you correctly pointed out, meaning Putin, he's destroying Ukraine. He just appointed Valery Gerasimov, who is the author of the entire strategy of indirect action. And so there's a Russian saying, "И сам не дам, и другим не дам," which means if I can't have it, you're not going to have it either. And so we are now fighting until the last Ukrainian and helping Russia effectively annihilate Ukraine by making this conflict endless.
Let's take a pause, Rebekah. When we come back, let's dive further into this and then bring in the other big player on the global scene, namely China.